The night I followed my husband, it was raining. Not the soft kind of rain that makes the world feel romantic and washed clean. The kind that comes in sideways, the kind that soaks through your coat before you've even crossed the driveway, the kind that feels like the sky itself is trying to push you back inside and tell you, don't do this. Go home. You don't want to know. I know that now. I wish I had listened. My name is Cordelia Vance. Most people call me Corey. And for 15 years, I was what you might describe as a woman who had her life together. A good house, a successful husband, a marriage that, from the outside, looked like something people used as a reference point, the kind of couple younger friends would look at and say, that's what I want. I was 43 years old, standing in the rain outside my own car, watching Desmond's taillights disappear around the corner. And something in me, something I can only describe as a cold, clear, horrible certainty, told me to follow him.
So I did.
And by the time the sun came up the next morning, I had lost my whole life. But here is what I didn't know yet. Standing there in the rain, soaked to my shoes, watching a man I had loved for nearly 2 decades drive away towards something he was hiding from me, what I didn't know yet was that losing your life isn't always a destruction. Sometimes it's an excavation. Sometimes you have to lose the life that was built on someone else's lies before you can find the one that actually belongs to you. This is that story. And the revenge at the center of it, the one I spent 7 months building, brick by careful brick, is nothing like what you're imagining right now. It wasn't hot. It wasn't impulsive. It didn't involve screaming in a parking lot or throwing a suitcase off a balcony. It was cold. It was precise. And when it landed, it didn't just take Desmond Vance down. It took the man who had been using him and my marriage as a shield. Stay with me, because this story earns every single minute of your time. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I want you to understand something about Desmond before I tell you what he did, because it matters. The worst betrayals don't come from people who are always rotten. They come from people who were genuinely good for a while. Desmond Vance was, when I married him at 28, one of the most generous human beings I had ever encountered. Not in the big, performative way. In the quiet way. The way that shows up as something left on your pillow when you've had a terrible week. The way that shows up as him remembering 3 months after a conversation that you mentioned wanting to try a specific restaurant, and then making a reservation. Small, consistent, attentive kindness. That is what I married. He was a financial consultant. Corporate accounts, compliance work, the kind of job that sounds dry when you describe it at a dinner party but pays well and comes with a certain kind of respect. He worked for a mid-sized firm called Harwick Capital in Atlanta. He'd been there for 9 years when we met, and in the decade and a half we were together, he'd risen to senior director. A corner office. A team of 12. A compensation package that allowed us to live very, very comfortably in a suburb of Atlanta where the streets were quiet and the neighbors waved. We didn't have children. That was a choice we made together, or at least I believed it was a choice we made together, though I have since revised my understanding of who was actually making decisions in my marriage. We had a life of travel, of weekend projects, of deep friendships and dinner parties, and the particular intimacy of 2 people who have grown so fluent in each other that they can communicate entire paragraphs with a look across a crowded room. Or so I believed. The first sign, and I want you to understand that I am telling you this not because I am ashamed, but because I want you to recognize it if it ever shows up in your own life. The first sign was the phone. Desmond had always been protective of his phone. He worked in financial compliance that felt reasonable. Client confidentiality. Sensitive account information. He kept it face down on the table. He took calls in other rooms. That had been true since the beginning, and I had never questioned it because it was woven into the fabric of who he was before I even arrived. But about 18 months before the night I followed him, something shifted. The phone wasn't just face down. It had a new password. It never left his person, not even to charge on the nightstand. It charged in his home office now, behind a door that was always closed. I noticed. I said nothing. I told myself, he's had a stressful quarter. I told myself, this is what privacy looks like in a long marriage. I told myself so many things because the alternative, the thing I was afraid to name, felt too enormous to survive. Then came the business trips. Desmond had always traveled for work. Quarterly conferences, client visits, the occasional regulatory summit. Nothing unusual. But starting about 14 months before the night it all collapsed, the trips got closer together. A week in Charlotte. Then 3 days in Washington, D.C. Then another week in Charlotte. Then D.C. again. I started to notice that the Charlotte trips never seemed to generate any new accounts. The D.C. trips never corresponded to any regulatory calendar I could find online. I noticed. I said nothing. And then there was the way he looked at his phone one Sunday morning in February, the February before the night I followed him, when a message came through and he read it and something crossed his face. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked almost like fear. He looked up. He saw me watching. He smiled. He said, "Work stuff," and put the phone in his pocket. But it was Sunday. And Desmond never worked on Sundays. I noticed. I said nothing. Until the night I followed him and said everything. Now, before I tell you what I actually found when I followed him, I need to tell you about Priya Ashworth. Because you cannot understand what I walked into that night without understanding who she was. And once you know who she was, you'll understand why this story is so much more complicated than a cheating husband. Priya Ashworth joined Harwick Capital 11 months before the night I followed Desmond. She was 36, sharp as a surgical instrument, and had come over from a competing firm where she'd built a reputation for being, in the words of one financial trade publication, ruthlessly effective at restructuring distressed accounts. I knew she existed. Desmond had mentioned her in passing, the way you mention a new colleague who is competent and unremarkable. Priya on my team, Priya flagged a compliance issue that, casual, unremarkable. I had no reason to think anything of her. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Priya Ashworth was not primarily at Harwick Capital to restructure distressed accounts. She was there because of Senator Garfield Mott. And Senator Garfield Mott is where this story stops being about a cheating husband and becomes something else entirely. Senator Mott was a 2-term Republican senator from Georgia. 61 years old. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room without trying. He sat on the Senate Finance Committee, which meant he had oversight access to financial regulatory bodies that could make or break firms like Harwick Capital with a single inquiry or, conversely, shield them from scrutiny that they very much deserved. Priya Ashworth, and I am going to ask you to follow this carefully, was Senator Mott's arrangement. Not publicly. Not officially. She was his private financial operative. She had been for 4 years. She moved from firm to firm on his instruction, embedding herself, identifying financial irregularities, and feeding information back to the senator. Information he used not to clean up corporate malfeasance, but to leverage it. To extract quiet compliance from firms who could not afford regulatory scrutiny. It was, in the simplest possible terms, a protection racket run through the architecture of corporate finance. And Desmond, brilliant, ambitious, ethical enough to know better but weak enough to do it anyway, had gotten tangled in it. He had not had an affair with Priya. He had made a deal with her. And the deal was destroying him. And, by extension, me. I didn't know any of this the night I followed him. I found it out later, piece by piece, with the help of a man named Ellsworth Pruitt. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the rain. It was a Thursday in September. I remember the day precisely because I had spent it doing something entirely ordinary, reorganizing the storage closet off the main hallway, the one where we kept winter coats and old photo albums and a bread maker we had not used in 6 years. It is strange, isn't it, how clearly you remember the mundane details of the day that changes everything. Desmond came home at 6:15. Normal. Dinner at 7. Normal. He was quieter than usual, but I had stopped tracking his quiet the way I once did. We watched television together. He went to bed at 10. Normal. I was in the kitchen at 11:30, unable to sleep, heating water for tea, when I heard the front door. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something because I think about this often. What is the difference between intuition and paranoia? I have decided, in the years since, that the difference is evidence. Paranoia is a feeling with nothing underneath it. Intuition is a feeling that has been collecting evidence for months, organizing it in the back of your mind, waiting for a moment to show you what it's built. What I felt when I heard that door was not paranoia. I turned off the burner. I moved to the window. I watched Desmond, who was supposed to be asleep, walk to his car in a jacket and dress shoes, holding his phone to his ear, moving fast. The way you move when you are late for something you should not be at. I stood at that window for possibly 30 seconds. And then I grabbed my keys. I followed him at a distance, lights off when I could manage it, staying 2 or 3 cars back. He drove for 22 minutes. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock on my dashboard with the particular focus of someone who is trying to stay calm and running out of ability to do so. He parked in the lot of a hotel I recognized, a Marriott off the interstate that was generic and anonymous, and exactly the kind of place you would choose if you did not want to be remembered. I parked across the street. I watched him go inside. I sat in my car in the rain for 11 minutes. And then I got out. I walked into the lobby. I didn't have a plan. I want to be honest about that. I had no plan. I was operating entirely on the specific, airless momentum of a woman who has decided she is done not knowing. The lobby was almost empty. A bored desk clerk, a couple in the far corner with luggage, a woman near the elevator bank, facing away from me, in a gray blazer. The woman turned around. It was not Priya Ashworth. It was Lena Mott, the senator's wife. I know what you're thinking. And I need you to stay with me because what happened next, the conversation I had with Lena Mott in that hotel lobby at 11:50 at night, is the moment this entire story turned. She wasn't there for the same reason I was. She was there because she had been following this thread for 2 years longer than I had. And what she told me in the next 40 minutes changed everything I thought I understood about my own marriage. Lena Mott was 58 years old. The kind of beautiful that comes not from youth, but from bearing witness to difficult things with her chin level. She had been married to Senator Garfield Mott for 31 years. She had raised 3 children, managed his campaigns, attended the fundraisers, smiled in the photographs. She had also, for the past 2 years, been very quietly building a case against him. We did not introduce ourselves in the lobby. She looked at me and seemed to already know who I was. She said, very calmly, "Are you Desmond Vance's wife?" I said yes. She said, "Come sit with me." We sat in a corner of the hotel restaurant, which was closed but dim and empty enough that no one noticed us. She ordered water. I couldn't have swallowed anything. She talked for 38 minutes. I know because I quietly started recording on my phone at the 4-minute mark when I understood that what she was saying was something I would need to be able to prove I had heard. Here is what she told me. Her husband, Senator Mott, had been running his financial leverage operation for almost a decade. Priya Ashworth was his 3rd operative in as many years, each one planted in a different firm, identifying exposure, feeding it back to Mott, allowing him to apply pressure. The arrangement kept Harwick Capital shielded from 2 separate regulatory inquiries that should, by rights, have resulted in serious consequences for the firm. Desmond, as Senior Director of Compliance, had known about one of those inquiries. He had been the one who flagged it internally. And when Priya presented him with the alternative, cooperate, stay quiet, allow certain account structures to continue without the scrutiny they warranted, Desmond had made a choice. He had chosen his career. He had chosen his bonus structure and his corner office and the lifestyle that corner office funded. And in doing so, he had become Mott's person inside Harwick. A source. A shield. Someone who could be called on to manage internal risk in ways that protected the senator's arrangement from discovery. The Thursday night meetings were not affairs. They were briefings. Priya would update Desmond on what the senator needed. Desmond would confirm what was manageable on his end. Lena had known about this for 2 years because she had also followed her husband one night. She had been building documentation ever since. She had copies of financial records, hotel surveillance she'd obtained through a private investigator, phone logs. She had enough, she believed, to hand to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. What she did not have was someone inside Harwick who could corroborate the internal compliance suppression. someone who could speak to what was known internally, and when she looked at me across that dim restaurant table and said, "Your husband is the missing piece, and you are the only person who can get to him." I sat with that for a long moment, and then I asked her one question. "How long do I have before this comes apart on its own?" She said, "Not long. Mott is up for re-election in 14 months. He will tie up loose ends before then. Your husband is a loose end." I did not go home that night. I drove to a 24-hour diner on Peachtree, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and sat in a booth until 4 in the morning making decisions. By the time the sky lightened, I had made 3. 1. I would not confront Desmond yet. 2. I would hire a private investigator. Not to catch him in something I already knew, but to build documentation that was clean and legally usable. 3. I would call an attorney first thing in the morning. Not a divorce attorney. A criminal defense attorney. Because I needed to understand exactly what Desmond's exposure was before I decided what to do with it. Ellsworth Pruitt, L., had been recommended to me by my attorney, a woman named Diane, who said flatly, "He is not charming, but he is the best." L was in his early 60s, former law enforcement, built like someone who had never bothered to stop lifting, with the energy of a man who found bureaucratic inefficiency morally offensive. He wore the same blue jacket to every meeting we had. He charged significantly more than I expected, and was worth every cent. I hired him on a Saturday. By the following Wednesday, he had confirmed 3 things independently. First, the hotel meetings were monthly. Regular. Always the same location. Always Priya and Desmond, occasionally with a third party whose face he had captured on a long-range camera lens and who Lena Mott later confirmed was one of Mott's senior aides. Second, Desmond had a secondary bank account I did not know about. Not a small one. Over the course of 3 years, he had routed a portion of his irregular bonus income into it, income that corresponded almost exactly to the timeline of his cooperation with Priya and Mott. Third, and this is where my stomach dropped through the floor, our home was in Desmond's name only. I had allowed that to happen when we bought it because his credit was cleaner and the mortgage terms were better, and I had trusted him with our financial architecture the way you trust someone you believe you are going to be with forever. If our marriage dissolved without careful management, I was not in a terrible legal position. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, and my attorney was confident, but I was in a vulnerable one. Desmond could move assets. He could slow-walk proceedings. He had resources and connections I did not yet fully understand. Elle told me, "You need leverage before you move. Move without it, and you're fighting a man who knows the terrain." He was right. So I waited, and I built. But I want to stop here and make sure you understand something about Senator Garfield Mott, because it would be easy at this point in the story to think of him as a distant, abstract villain, a corrupt politician, a name on a document, something you read about in a news article and shake your head at over your morning coffee. He was not abstract. He was not distant. In month 2, before I had built much of anything, when I was still in the early stages of working with Elle, I had a visitor. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was home alone, working on a client presentation. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to a man I did not recognize. Mid-40s, neat in the way that suggests military background or the kind of profession where appearance signals authority. He was holding nothing. He had no folder, no briefcase, no business card. He simply stood on my porch and smiled. He said he was a constituent services representative from Senator Mott's Atlanta office. He said the senator was always grateful for the support of people in the community, people like Desmond, who contributed to a healthy financial sector in the state. He said the senator hoped Desmond and his family were doing well. He said, and I remember this precisely because I wrote it down within 60 seconds of closing the door, he said, "The senator especially hopes that Mrs. Vance is finding this period manageable. These can be stressful times for families in Desmond's position. The senator thinks of the people around his colleagues. He pays close attention." He said good afternoon. He left. I stood in my front hallway for 3 full minutes without moving. He pays close attention. That was the message. Delivered with a smile, on a Tuesday afternoon, through a man with no name and no card, to a woman who was supposed to be uninvolved and uninformed. It was Senator Mott telling me, through 5 degrees of deniability, that he knew I existed, that he was watching, that whatever I was thinking about doing, I should consider his reach before I did it. It was the most frightening thing that happened to me during those 7 months. Not because of what he said, because of what it confirmed about who I was dealing with. This was not a man who had stumbled into corruption and gotten in too deep. This was a man who had built a machine, patient, invisible, thoroughly deniable, and had been running it for a decade. A man who sent messengers to the homes of wives. I called Elle that evening and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. Now you know exactly what's at stake. And now you have documentation of attempted intimidation. Write down every word. Date it. Send it to your attorney tonight." I did. And the fear, once I had converted it into evidence, became something I could use. 7 months. That is how long I kept my face still across the dinner table from a man I knew was lying to me and to every institution that had trusted him. 7 months of ordinary evenings, of weekend errands, of birthday cards and holiday plans, while I was quietly assembling something he never saw coming. And in month 6, I found the one piece that made it complete. Stay with me. I want to tell you what it costs to keep a secret from someone you live with. People imagine it's exhausting in a dramatic way, that you're constantly performing, constantly suppressing the urge to scream the truth across the dinner table. It isn't like that. It's a different kind of cost. It's the cost of becoming slightly less present, of letting the warmth in your face become something more neutral, of answering questions in shorter sentences than you once would have, of watching someone reach for your hand and letting them take it while you think about something else entirely. Desmond noticed. He said twice that I seemed distant. I said I was tired. He accepted this because it was easier than pressing further, and because I think some part of him understood that any pressing might open a conversation he was not prepared to have. I spent those 7 months doing 4 things. I am a landscape architect freelance with a client base I had built over 12 years. I put more into my work than I ever had, not because I needed to emotionally, but because I needed to shore up my independent financial position. I took on 4 new projects. I documented my income carefully with my attorney's guidance. I met with Lena Mott twice more, once at her suggestion, once at mine. She was further along than I was. Her file with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit was nearly complete. She was waiting, she said, for the right moment. I told her what I was building on my end. She listened. At our second meeting, she handed me something across a coffee shop table, a USB drive. On it, she said, were 3 years of Mott's internal communications, obtained through a source she declined to name, that documented his use of Priya as an operative and specifically referenced Harwick Capital and, by name, Desmond. "This is insurance," she said. "For you. If Desmond cooperates with the federal investigation, this protects him from being the primary target. If he doesn't cooperate, it ensures he's not protected." I held that drive in my hand and understood that Lena Mott was not a victim who had stumbled onto information. She was a woman who had spent 2 years making very deliberate choices. I respected that enormously. The third thing I did was meet with my attorney every 3 weeks. By month 4, my divorce filing was drafted and ready. By month 5, we had added a fraud claim that my attorney believed was airtight given the hidden account and the non-disclosure of financial assets. The fourth thing I did was wait for month 6. In month 6, Elle called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "I have something. You should see it in person." I drove to his office. He had a photograph taken 4 days earlier. Desmond, leaving a building downtown that Elle identified as the Georgia field office of the FBI. My husband, in a clear panic, had gone to the FBI himself. He hadn't gone to confess. He'd gone to a private attorney who worked out of a suite in that building. Elle confirmed it within the day. Desmond was beginning to understand that his arrangement with Mott was becoming dangerous, and he was exploring his options. He was scared. And a scared man, I had learned, will agree to things he would never agree to otherwise. On a Sunday evening in month 7, I made dinner. Roast chicken, which was Desmond's favorite. I opened a good bottle of wine. I set the table properly, The good dishes, the cloth napkins, the things we brought out when something felt like an occasion. Desmond noticed. He sat down looking slightly wary in the way a person looks when something they can't name feels off. He said, "What's the occasion?" I said, "I want to have an honest conversation with you." The color left his face in a way that confirmed everything I already knew. I did not yell. "I want to be clear about this. I had made a decision sometime in the 4th month that this conversation would not be emotional. Not because I wasn't devastated, I was. Not because I wasn't furious, I was. But because emotion would have given him something to manage, and I did not want him managing me. I wanted him understanding that what was in front of him was not a wife in pain. It was a woman with a file. I told him what I knew. Not all of it. I kept Lena's name out entirely, kept the USB drive out entirely. I told him what Elle had documented. The meetings, the account, the timeline of his cooperation with Priya and Mott. I placed 3 photographs on the table, the hotel, the account statements, the image of him entering his attorney's building. He looked at the photographs the way a man looks at something he has been dreading for so long that seeing it in front of him almost feels like relief. His jaw went tight. His hands, which had been resting on either side of his plate, pulled back slowly, like he needed to put distance between himself and what was on the table. He did not reach for the photos. He did not pick them up or examine them or try to explain them. He just looked. And in that looking, I understood something I had not fully understood before. He had always known this moment was coming. Somewhere underneath all of it, he had been waiting for it. I said, "Here is what happens next. You have 2 choices." He said, very quietly, "Corey." I said, "Don't. Listen." He listened. I told him, "Choice 1. He contests the divorce, moves to protect his assets, and fights me. In which case I hand everything I have to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and he faces federal charges without the benefit of having cooperated first. Choice 2. He cooperates with the federal investigation voluntarily, with his attorney's guidance. He signs a full financial disclosure as part of the divorce proceedings, everything, including the hidden account. He agrees to an equitable settlement. And I do not add to his federal exposure in any way." When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. He looked up from the photographs. And for the first time in longer than I could pinpoint, he looked directly at me. Not through me. Not past me the way he had been doing for months. That particular form of avoidance that a person practices when they are ashamed and cannot afford to show it. He looked at me the way he used to look at me, and it was almost worse than everything else, because I could see in it exactly who he had been before he made the choice that unmade us. He asked me how long I'd known. I told him 7 months. Something crossed his face that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just guilt. It was the specific devastation of a person realizing that while they were carefully managing their lies, the person they were lying to had been quietly outpacing them the entire time. He had thought he was the one with the information advantage. He had thought, on some level, that his world was the real one, and mine was the surface he let me live on. And now he understood, sitting across from his own roast chicken in his own dining room, that it had been the other way around for 7 months. He said, "I thought I was protecting you. From all of it. I thought if I managed it, contained it, got out before it came apart, you'd never have to know." I let that sit for exactly as long as it deserved. Then I said, "You are protecting your career, Desmond. Don't do that to me. Not now." He didn't argue. He put his face in his hands. And then, and this is the part one was not prepared for, the part that cost me something even through all my careful armor, he started to cry. Not loudly. Not the dramatic, chest-heaving kind of crying that asks to be comforted. The quiet kind. The kind that a person does when they understand that they have genuinely, permanently destroyed something that was real. I did not reach for him. I sat very still and let him understand it completely. We sat at that table for another 2 hours. By the end of it, his voice was steadier and his answers were direct, and he had agreed to call his attorney in the morning. I cleared the dinner dishes. I left the wine on the table. And I slept, for the first time in 7 months, without dreaming. He made the call. He cooperated. And when the federal investigation formally opened, and it opened within 60 days of that Sunday dinner, the name at the center of it wasn't Desmond Vance.
It was Senator Garfield Mott.
But the ending of this story isn't in a courtroom. The ending is something I want you to hear because it is not what most people expect. Stay with me for just a few more minutes. It's worth it. The divorce was finalized in a little under 9 months, which my attorney said was remarkably clean for the level of financial complexity involved. Desmond cooperated fully. The hidden account, $214,000 accumulated over 3 years, was included in the marital estate. The house was sold. I took my half and bought something smaller, something that was entirely mine, a property whose deed had only one name on it. Judge Beverly Crane presided. She was known for being efficient and unsentimental, which was exactly what I wanted. There was no drama in that courtroom. There was paperwork and signatures and a gavel. Desmond received a reduced charge as part of his cooperation agreement. 1 count of financial misconduct, no prison time, significant fines, professional license revoked. His career at Harwick Capital ended the week the investigation became public. The firm itself was fined heavily and underwent a full regulatory restructuring. Priya Ashworth cooperated separately. She had her own attorney, her own deal. She named Mott in explicit detail. Her testimony, combined with Lena's documentation and the financial trail Elle had helped build, was the spine of the case. Senator Garfield Mott was indicted on 7 counts, including conspiracy to commit financial fraud, extortion, and abuse of public office. He resigned from the Senate before the indictment was formally announced, a move his people called focusing on his family, and that the rest of us called what it was. Lena Mott filed for divorce the same week. I sent her a card. I don't know if that's strange. It felt right. Here's the thing about losing your whole life. You think, before it happens, that the loss would be the end of the story. That the chapter ends there, on a rainy night in a hotel parking lot, watching the man you built everything with walk through a glass door into a life he kept from you. But loss, I have learned, is not an ending. It is a demolition. And demolition in the right hands is just preparation. My landscape architect brain understands this better than most. You do not build on a site that has not been cleared. You do not plant in soil that has not been turned. You do not design something beautiful on a foundation that was crooked to begin with. I am 51 now. I have a new house that I love with a specific and personal love. The love you feel for something that is entirely yours, uncontested, unchosen for you. My practice has grown. I hired an associate last spring. I take trips I plan myself, to places Desmond never had any interest in going. My best friend Nadine, who was the only person who knew any of what I was doing during those 7 months, who sat across from me in a parking lot at 2 a.m. in month 3 when I was close to falling apart, and said, "You are not falling apart. You are in the middle of something. There is a difference." Nadine and I spent 2 weeks in Portugal in the fall. We walked the Douro Valley. We drank wine at 9 a.m. because we could. I think about the woman I was on that rainy night sometimes. Soaked, terrified, standing outside her own car wondering if she really wanted to know. I want to tell her something. I want to tell her. Yes. Follow him. Get in the car.
Drive.
Not because what you find won't hurt. It will devastate you in ways you do not yet have language for. But because you deserve to know the truth about the life you are living. You deserve to know what is real and what was built on someone else's convenience. And you deserve the chance, once you know, to build something that cannot be taken from you. There is a garden at my new house. A small one. Nothing elaborate, but I designed it myself, which I had never done for my own home in 15 years of doing it professionally for everyone else's. I planted it in the spring, the first spring after the divorce was final. Coneflowers along the back fence. A Japanese maple in the corner that will take years to reach its full height, which is exactly the point. A stone path that curves, because I wanted a path that curved, and there was no one to negotiate with about it. I sat in that garden on a Saturday morning in April, with coffee, in the particular silence that belongs only to a house where you are the only person who decides the temperature and the music and whether the curtains open. And I felt something I had not felt in so long I had almost stopped believing it still existed inside me. I felt completely, entirely like myself. That is what I got back when I lost my whole life. Not the life I had. Not even a better version of that life. Something new. Something rooted in ground that had been properly cleared. Something that had my name on the deed, in every sense of the word. And honestly, I would not trade it. Not for a single day of what came before. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone you know, or something you've been carrying, drop it in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. The next story is already in progress. You do not want to come back and find you missed it. This is Payback Drop. We'll see you in the next one.